The 390th got there in July of 1943, got to England. The war ended in the middle of 45, so they were there 2 years flying combat. Lost 176 B-17s. Amazing amount of airplanes.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Sex, seniority, and salary in that order.
Rock on. You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
It's a show by professional pilots for professional pilots.
I looked back at them and I said, I don't think we're at the right airport. And they go, I don't think we are either.
Each episode, we bring you fascinating conversations with industry experts.
I think I should be a go-to on how to deal with 63, 64-year-old men.
You're going to chase it like a dog chasing a school bus.
But we're not just about the serious stuff. We're here to have fun.
And I like to sit with pilots a lot of times. I always say they're better looking than Tom Cruise.
It's a whole thing.
The 21.5 Professional Pilots Podcast is your destination for everything aviation, whether you're cruising in the flight levels or just starting your journey.
Welcome back to a special episode of the 121.5 Professional Pilots Podcast.
The show for the pros with two professional pilots. Max, you arranged a very special interview for this show. In person, with an airplane. A lot of logistics went into this one.
Yeah, well, so just quickly, if you didn't hear in the previous episode, I was on an overnight in Tucson. My wife and our baby daughter came up to visit me, and we went to the Pima Air and Space Museum. And there's a separate museum on the property that is called the 390th Memorial Museum. And so I walk in there, and there's a big B-17 on display, and there's a gentleman talking beneath it. And one of the docents there says, hey, just so you know, this guy was an aircraft commander on a B-17 in World War II. He's 102 years old. I was like, no way. And so we went and we watched him talk, and it's just, it's an unbelievable thing to see a guy like that talking underneath the B-17 about getting his engine shot out, over Germany. So I was pretty compelled by that. And so we reached out and were able to arrange the interview you're about to hear.
When you pitched it to me, you said, hey, we got to move quickly on this one. Let's go talk to this guy.
Well, it's funny because it's not funny. I had an experience before where there was a gentleman in aviation that had done a ton of stuff that was very old, and we didn't move quick enough, and he passed away. And so there's not a lot of people like this left, and to have the opportunity to have one that's relatively close by and that is still at 102 years old, very articulate, and is very impressive. So yeah, we had to move. We had to seize the opportunity. I think
absolutely
sounds better.
Just a couple quick notes on this interview. Was in person. Audio may sound a little bit different than a normal podcast, although I think it turned out pretty good. The other note is we had to cut the interview short because he had another speaking. He had to do a presentation at the museum. So all of the stories were great, but I just was left wanting even more. So.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that it worked out that way. He's at this museum every Thursday, so we flew in the Cub down there with all of our gear and to do this interview. And unfortunately, a crowd was gathering for his weekly speaking event.
Yep.
And there just happened to be, I think there just happened to be a lot of people because during the summers there's slow months there, right? Because the Pima Air and Space Museum is mostly outdoors, with the exception, and there's a lot indoors too there, but they're just slower. So I thought, there was just a lot of people gathering, and one of the other volunteers there was getting anxious about.
Yeah, he's a very popular speaker. So we got what we could. We're excited to share it. The 390th Memorial Museum, big shout out to them and a thank you for arranging this for us. 390th.org is the website. We'll have their information in the show notes so that next time you're down, maybe on a Tucson overnight, maybe you bid a Tucson overnight like Max did, it's worth it.
It was awesome. Well, the Pima Air and Space Museum in and of itself is very impressive. I mean, they got a lot of very cool things there, including the Philippine Mars now that we and the Beach Jet serial number 1 we both flew.
That's right.
Probably
we saw.
the center of their collection. But
Centerpiece, yes.
and but the 390th is what they really want people to understand, because it's hard to differentiate, but they are a separate museum that, your ticket to the Peam Air and Space Museum does not benefit them in any way, shape, or form. So, if you go, you enjoy what they have there. It's certainly, for that experience, was worth it to me. I gave them, I think, all the cash that I had in my wallet at the time into the collection box, because I was
$11 crisp dollars for you guys. Thank you very much.
There's a couple 50s in there, I think. Even I was compelled.
You were compelled.
It was cool. I was impressed. It was an experience I was definitely worth paying for. So,
all right. Well, enough of this. Let's jump right into the interview. Here we go.
All right, Dylan. Well, on the show today, we have Colonel Bushong. We're very excited for this interview. Thanks very much for taking the time for us. You had an amazing career in the military and throughout World War II. So let's start at the beginning and kind of how you got into aviation.
I was a kid living in Ohio, graduated from high school. And incidentally, I just was put on the honor roll back there at my high school for military service. But my girlfriend got a job in Dayton. So our little town was 60 miles north. So I figured I ought to go down to Dayton too. So I went down there and I got a job at Wright Field. A GS something, but probably very low on the scale. But I ended up getting a secret clearance. So I was handling classified material, and my job was to pick up and deliver classified material from the chiefs of staff, the 5 chiefs of staff of Air Service Command. That was the command that was responsible for obtaining all military equipment for the Army Air Force. So that's where I was working. And one of the chiefs of staff had a captain aide with big pilot's wings, and he kept telling me, go get into the aviation cadet program. I said, well, to get in, you have to have 2 years of college. He said, no, there's a test you can take to wipe out that 2-year requirement. He kept pushing and pushing. He knew I liked airplanes. And so I finally went over to Patterson Field and applied for it and took that test. 24 people took it the day I took it, and 4 passed.
Oh, wow.
So I was one of them. And I said, okay, now what do I do? You guys said, we'll call you. So I went back to work over at Wright Field. Now they were close together, Wright Field and Patterson.
What were you doing for work at Wright Field?
I was picking up and delivering
classified
mail.
documents. That's right. Okay.
And so the guy called me from over in Patterson and said, come over and get sworn in. Okay. So I went over to Patterson. He said, stand right there and hold up your right hand. I did. He administered the oath and he said, you're now a private in the Army. I said, wait a minute. I want to back out of that. I don't want to be a private in the Army. I wanted to go into the Air Force. Well, this is just a holding until we get an opening in the cadet program. I can envision me digging foxholes.
Yeah, I bet.
Anyhow, I went back to work and I told my boss, I'm in the Army now. The guy gave me a piece of paper, 1 sheet, and it was an official order. It had my name, my serial number, and PVT on leave.
Oh.
That's what it said.
What year was this?
1942.
Okay.
Yeah. The war started in 41. This was April of 1942.
Yeah, I can see how it makes you a little nervous being sworn in as a private in the Army.
Yeah,
with
yeah.
a war going on.
Oh, golly. A private in the Army? Oh, my gosh. Oh, so anyhow, He said, no, that's just to hold you until we get an opening in the cadets. So then I told my boss, I'm in the Army. My boss said, you are? You got to quit your job. You can't have two government jobs at the same time. So I quit, and my home was 60 miles away, and I was living in a room that I paid rent for. Packed up my stuff and went home. Now I'm in civilian clothes, living with my parents. The draft board called me in this little town, said, you haven't registered for the draft. You got to get down there and register. I said, no, I don't. I'm already in the Army. They said, yeah, sure you are. You know, I am
We've heard this one before.
in civilian clothes. So I went down there, and there were 4 people on the board. I knew them all, small town. And I said, really, I am in the Army already. They all shook their head. I got my little piece of paper out, handed it to the first one, and they all had to read it. And they said, guess he is in the Army. We can't draft him. So I was several weeks at home there waiting for a call. Finally got a call. Report back to Patterson. You're going to be appointed. I was a private now. You're going to be appointed aviation cadet. So I got back up to Patterson. They said, okay, you're now an aviation cadet. Here's another piece of paper. And we'll call you.
Again?
Again, yeah. So it was a week or two, and he called me and said, report for duty. So I reported up there. They shipped me to Memphis, Tennessee for classification center. That's where they took all the cadets, and you had batteries of tests that you took, both physical and mental, to decide whether you're going to pilot school, navigator, or bombardier. Those are the 3 schools they had. So I passed everything for the pilot school, and oh my God, I really wanted to be a pilot.
My bad.
And so they said, okay, we'll call you. Finally, I was at Memphis now, and they said, okay, you're classified as pilot, or going to San Antonio, Texas. So that's where I started pilot training. The first phase was 2 months of ground school. And then we had 3 different phases of flight training, primary and basic and advanced. And since I was 6 feet tall, when I went to advanced, I went to twin engine airplanes. They figured you're not going to be flying fighters. So it was in a cockpit. They had a cockpit side by side. So we're getting used to flying with a pilot and co-pilot. So I graduated and went straight to B-17 combat crew training.
Wait, what kind of airplane were you flying in training? Was it T-6s?
No. The advanced, I had the AT-10 and the AT-9. Those 2 were both twin engine airplanes.
What was primary in?
Primary was PT-19, twin seated single engine low wing monoplane, open cockpit. In Texas in the winter.
Yeah.
Pretty chilly. And then basic was the BT-13, made by Vultee. So we called it the Vultee vibrator. And so I finished that phase and then went to advanced. 2 twin engine airplanes that we flew there. And because I was tall, they were preparing me for big airplanes. And so I asked for B-17s because I thought they were such a pretty airplane up in the air. And sure enough, I went to B-17 combat crew training up in the state of Washington. Now, a pile of people came in there. There were pilots, navigators, bombardiers, flight engineers, gunners, radio operators, and they formed the 10-man crews. And they said, okay, this is now a crew. You guys are going to train together, ground school and flight school, flight training. So they formed these crews, and we started training then as a crew. So 10 guys, and I was the co-pilot, 20 years old. The pilot was a real old guy. He was 26. And so we flew together night and day around Washington, went out over the Pacific for gunnery practice. They had tow targets going by so our gunners could practice. And then after a couple of months, they said, okay, you're shipping out. 35 crews had been training together, and all 35 shipped out at the same time and went by troop train across the U.S., stopped in Kansas, and got some more testing and some more equipment, and then proceeded on to New Jersey. And we went to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey. They put us up in barracks. Now, 35 crews, 10 men per crew. So that was a lot of people. They said, okay, you can call home, tell them, but don't tell them where you are. Okay. Nobody knew where Camp Kilmer was anyhow.
Yeah, right.
So all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, they came through the barracks, said, get your stuff and come with us. So we got on board trucks, packed the whole back end of trucks, and headed down to the dock. We got off the trucks and boarded a ship, the Queen Elizabeth.
Oh, you're
No
kidding.
way.
So it sounds like we had luxury travel.
Yeah.
There were 12,000 troops on there. And since I was an officer, I had first class accommodation.
Oh, you got lucky.
We were in a cabin designed for 1 or 2 people, and there were 18 of us in there. The bunks started at the floor on both sides and went all the way to near the ceiling. You could just barely get in. And then all of our luggage was in the middle of this small room, little path around it that we could walk. So we started across the Atlantic all by ourselves, no escort. I said, you know, that Atlantic is full of subs. This is to one of the crewmen. He said, yeah, we can outrun them. I said, wait a minute now. I was a rabbit hunter in my youth, and the rabbit could outrun me, but I learned how to lead.
Yeah.
Them. What if they lead us? He said, we got that problem solved too. We zig and zag every 3 minutes, full speed. So that's how we went across the Atlantic, zigging and zagging every 3 minutes at full speed. Took 5 days to get across. And landed in Scotland. All 35 crews were still together. We got on a train down to England, and all 35 crews went to the 390th Bomb Group at Framlingham, England. So this museum that we are in is the 390th Memorial Museum. I may be the only surviving member of the 390th Bomb.
Wow. And how many were there at one time?
Oh my God. Thousands went through there.
And Dick, for any of our listeners that don't know, how old are you right now?
I'm 102. And I still work every Thursday. I'm a docent at the 390th Memorial Museum. So it's important that I do that, you know, to tell people what it was like back there.
Yeah. Well, I was here a few weeks ago with my wife, and we walked in and heard you telling the story. And the guy told me he was the aircraft commander of a B-17 in World War II. He's telling a story about flying. I was like, wow, that's not something you walk in and see very often anymore. It's somebody that was there telling the story.
Well, I was co-pilot at first at
Sure.
20 years old. And then when I turned 21, I had a lot of experience by then. I went over to the operations officer and I said, I'm 21 years old now and I've got a lot of experience. How about getting checked out as first pilot? So he said, okay, let's do it. So he got a B-17 and I got in the left seat and did everything. And we're flying around. He said, see that B-17 way over there? Yeah. Go hook onto his wing and fly formation. I want to see how good you are. Because we always flew in formation when we were in combat. So I latched onto him and flew wherever he went. You know, when you fly in formation, you don't look where you are. You look only at that other airplane. So then he said, okay, break off. If you can find home and land this thing, you're checked out. I knew how to get home. We had a marker beacon at each base, and I tuned that into my radio compass and pointed right to home.
It's like GPS.
Yeah. And I went back there and made the best landing I ever made. Beep, beep, you know. And he said, okay, you're checked out. Well, so I flew the last part of my tour as aircraft.
Well, let's go back. So you arrived at the base in England with the rest of the 350 guys you trained with in Washington. And then what happened when you got there?
We flew some practice missions.
I was going to ask if your first flight in the B-17 was okay.
So that we could see how that formation existed.
Got it.
How to get in it. So then I got sick and they threw me in the hospital. I went over to the flight surgeon at night and he was still in his office. I was up chucking and really hurting. And he did some testing. He said, I think you have yellow jaundice. You're staying here tonight. Tomorrow you're going to the hospital. So next morning I got on an ambulance and went to the hospital about 35 miles from our base. The closest Army hospital. We were Army Air Force in those days. And so they threw me in a ward with a bunch of yellow guys. Supposedly I had yellow jaundice.
Right.
Well, I was there a couple of weeks and I didn't turn yellow. And the doc kept checking me. And finally he said, well, you don't have it. Whatever you had that brought you in here, you're over that. You're going back to duty. Okay. So I'm 35 miles from my base. I got a ride on an ambulance that was going that direction about half the way. Then I got a ride on a truck that was going my way, and he dumped me off at the front gate of my base. So it was near dusk. I wandered around and found our Quonset hut. When we had moved in there, we were assigned these Quonsets in our squadron. They split that 35 crews up amongst the 4 combat squadrons. So in my hut, there were 12 officers, including me. Each crew had 4 officers, the 2 pilots, navigator, and bombardier. So there were 12 guys in my hut. I found the hut, opened the door, turned the light on. There were 12 beds, but 11 of the mattresses were rolled up with no bedding on them. And my bed was over in the corner, and it was still made, and my clothes were hanging there. So I went across the street to the orderly room of our squadron, and there was a guy on duty for the night. They called him the CQ, charge of quarters. He was just there to answer the phone, and I said, where did you move my crew? They were right there in that hut. He said, I don't know. I'm just a CQ. I'm just here for the night. But in the next hut is the operations officer for the squadron. He knows where everybody is. So we were going there and asked him. So I went in there and told him my name. And he said, "Oh, your crew was shot down." What a shock that was.
No kidding.
Whoa.
And I guess I turned pale when he told me. He said, "You better sit down." So I sat down on a bunk. There were no chairs in these huts. And I sat down on a bunk, and he went over to a Foot Locker and got out a tin cup and a bottle of bourbon and poured a slug. Said, "I think you better have this." Then he made a statement I will never forget. He said, "I don't want you to go back over to that hut tonight." He knew there were 11 empty beds in there, and that wouldn't be a good place to go. It would have been horrible. Well, I found out that not only my crew was shot down, all 3 of those crews were shot down. 2 of them on their first mission, my crew and 1 other. The 3rd crew was first or second. I haven't been able to find out. Whew, what a shock. Now, next day, I'm assigned to a crew. Their co-pilot took my place when my crew was shot down. So I'm now their co-pilot.
You're pretty popular over there.
I wasn't really popular right away. We became really close friends after a while. But
had you ever met anyone in that other crew before?
I don't think so. And they were in my squadron, but not in my hut. And so they were in another hut somewhere near. And they had flown 1 mission before that. And they didn't make it back to England. They ditched in the North Sea. And the airplane had 2 big 6-man rafts. They deployed those and got in the rafts. 1 man died from exposure. He got into the water in the North Sea. It's pretty chilly in December. And he died later from exposure. The rest of them were rescued. That was their first mission. And that co-pilot was on that mission. Then he went with my crew, and they got shot down. So he only tried twice, and he didn't make it back to England either time. Now, if that guy walked in here and asked me to ride to Tucson with him, I wouldn't go. Anyhow, now I'm situated with a new crew. Palmer was the pilot, and we started flying missions. And so we got to be a close-knit crew, 10 guys, and everybody knew everybody else and knew what their job was and knew that that guy knew his job and could do it. So it was really a good crew. And so we flew mission after mission.
Let's take a quick break to tell you about a friend of the show, Timothy P. Pope. Tim is a certified financial planner who specializes in helping professional pilots chart a smarter financial course. Whether you're focused on retirement, investment management, or strategic tax planning, Tim brings the tools and insight to help you make the most of your career and beyond. He's also the host of the Pilot's Portfolio podcast, where he breaks down real-world financial strategies designed specifically for pilots. Timothy P. Pope, helping professional pilots make the most out of life.
Now, on my 18th mission with that crew, that was the first full daylight raid on Berlin. The first time a mass of airplanes got to Berlin in the daytime. Now, when I say Berlin, we were not bombing the city of Berlin. We had targets around the edge because our airplane was equipped with the Norden bomb sight. The Norden bomb sight, we could bomb a specific target. Now, every airplane in our formation didn't have a bomb sight. Everybody watched the lead airplane in that squadron. To give you a description of what a group looked like, there was a lead squadron, a low squadron, and a high squadron in a V shape. And depending on the size that day, we were either 21 ships or 30. So if it was 21, there were element of three, and a single in each squadron. And if it was 30, there were 3 elements of 3 and a single. That gave us 30 airplanes in our group that day. That was the group formation. And we had a specific target. We and other groups were bombing that same target. On that first Berlin raid, our target was an electrical equipment manufacturing company right on the edge of Berlin. They made electrical equipment for the German army, and we wanted to put them out of business. And we did. We made rubble out of that factory. About 25 years ago, I was working here and at the museum and said, I wonder if I could find the name of that company we bombed that day. So I got a stack of books and I kept going. I found it. The factory we bombed that day on the edge of Berlin was Bosch.
Wow.
Kidding me.
And they're still making stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I can guarantee you they're not making it in that factory.
And then one thing too that I think a lot of people understand is why you flew in those big formations was so you guys could defend as a group, right?
Yeah,
against
it was
fighters.
a defensive formation. We were staggered so that everybody could shoot.
Shoot, not hit.
Yeah, and yet we were tight so that the enemy looked at ours. The 390th flew a snug formation, but they still lost a lot of airplanes. But the 390th got there in July of 1943, got to England. The war ended in the middle of 45, so they were there 2 years flying combat. Lost 176 B-17s. Amazing amount of airplanes.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Jeez. It seems too that flying in a tight formation like that would be good for defense against fighters, but not so good with flak.
Well, that's right, because the flak, if it went off in the middle of a squadron, everybody got
airplanes
some
down,
pieces.
right?
There's some chunks of it down there.
Oh yeah, we'll look at that later.
Yeah, but
So you defied the odds.
oh my
would
God,
say.
yeah. What were they saying when you went on your first mission? Like, what were the odds you were gonna make it back?
not very good. About 1 out of 3. Here's what happened to that 35 crews that went over when I went.
Yeah.
12 and a half of them finished their missions and got to go home. Now, when I got there, they said fly 25 missions and you can go home. And then after 18, that first day I raid on Berlin, the next day the commander got us together and said, sorry to tell you this, guys, but the quota has been raised to 30.
Can you imagine that?
Now, he said, some of you have a lot of missions. We had us all together.
You're like 2/3 done at that point.
I had 18 already. He said, what we're going to do is prorate you guys that have a lot of missions. So they added 3 to me.
Oh,
That was a real morale booster.
Oh, man.
3 more
So
to
you're
go.
3/4 of the way done, and then they added 3 more to you. Jeez.
So I had to go 28. Each one, I'm wondering, am I going to make it back today?
I bet. And so a mission, to count as a mission, like of the 18, did you have mechanical issues or things like that where you had to turn around? Would that count? Or would
No, it did not count. We only had that once. That was an abort. And so we're climbing out over the North Sea in formation. We'd already got in formation. And the 6 bottles of oxygen in the front that served the crew members in front sprung a leak, and they're going down fast. We could not proceed. We had to turn around and go back. That's the only abort that I had. The rest of the time I went.
And so some of the missions, I mean, was there a time you'd go on a mission and not get shot at?
No. always got shot at. As soon as we hit the coast in France, Holland, or Belgium, we're in enemy territory.
erupt,
so we're
right.
getting shot at right away.
Do you remember, Dick, what altitude you'd be at when you'd come in over the English Channel and into
Yeah,
mainland?
we tried to get to our bombing altitude before we hit the coast. Now, we bombed between 19 and 24,000 feet. The higher we got, the less accurate the flak was, but we could not get above it. So, we were heavy. We were loaded to the ears. Max gross takeoff every time. Max gross.
Yeah, because you put on the gas you need and then fill it up the rest with bombs, right?
Yeah, that was the two adjusting factors. If we're going really far, fewer bombs and more fuel. If we're going mid-Germany, more bombs and less fuel. So that was the adjusting factor. Everything else was the same.
Yeah.
We had 12 50 caliber machine guns and a crew of 10. So those two were standard. And they're bullets for the machine gun.
Yeah.
And then the other two adjusting factors were distance, and so fuel and bombs. Farther, fewer bombs and more fuel.
How fast does a B-17 go?
Oh, it was speedy. At level flight, indicated airspeed was 155 miles an hour.
And what kind of climb rate would you have when you're max gross like that?
Oh, yeah, the climb rate was pretty fair. We'd climb at 500 to 700 feet per minute. Wow. Yeah. And, we were using a lot of power. The 4 engines each generated 1,200 horsepower at takeoff power setting. Now, max gross takeoff weight every time. So our runway wasn't very long. And we used it all. And there'd be an airplane just lifting off, another one halfway down the runway, another one just beginning on that short runway.
So on a regular mission, let's say I don't know if the time matters, but would you and the aircraft commander, if you're the second pilot, are you flying for an hour and then you switch, or how would that work?
No, we switched about every 15 minutes because flying formation that tight was hard work. You're constantly moving controls a little bit. So we switched back and forth every 15 or 20 minutes. So when I'm on the controls, I could not see what was going on out there. But when I'm off, then I could see the fighters and the flak, and scary as hell.
Did they have an in-flight coffee maker? Was there any way to stay awake? How did you, adrenaline only to keep you going?
And we left pretty early every time. Now, here's how we knew we were going to fly today. Somebody came into our hut and grabbed our toe and said, "Get up, you're flying today." So if my crew was going to fly, the 4 guys in my crew were awakened at about 3 to 3:30 in the morning. And so, "Get up, you're flying today." Now, we had to clean up, go to breakfast. Then the officers went to briefing, and the enlisted men went down to the airplane. And so in briefing, they told us where we were going, what our target was. We saw pictures of the target generally, and what altitude we were going to fly, and how many ships we were putting up that day. That was all told to us in briefing.
And so would the lead navigator be navigating the whole formation?
Yeah. However, there was a line of bomb groups going to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we were following in line. But the lead navigator in that lead group, he was navigating by the seat of his pants. Pilotage was very important. Looking at the ground and at a map, and then say, "Well, okay, we're right here."
Really? And that's how they did it?
Yeah. Because we had no electronic help. you know.
Yeah, sure.
The Germans didn't want to help us.
No
get there.
stars. Yeah, no- and so you're just wow.
And our route.
So what if there was cloud cover?
Oh, if there was cloud cover over the target, we couldn't bomb. Later in the war, they equipped one group of B-17s with radar. So if we knew that there was cloud cover, possible or for sure, over the target, we would import one of them to be our lead airplane.
Oh. Well, what if there was cloud cover between England and the target?
That's okay, as long as we didn't have to go through it. We flew over it or in it or under it, but not through it. You couldn't take a formation into a cloud bank or you begin banging into each other. You just can't see the other airplane.
But how do you navigate if there's cloud? If you're cloud there?
Dead reckoning. Yeah.
Dead reckoning, and then when you can see the ground again, make sure you're on the right course, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was a tough way to get there.
No kidding.
But it was the best we had. And I never, ever got back to England without holes in my airplane. Got hit every time. Hundreds of holes sometimes. You know, that flak was a cannon shell set to go off up there where we were. When it exploded, pieces went in all directions. And the skin was aluminum.
Yeah, right. Well, how did they patch it up every time?
The sheet metal guys got on it, and if there's a hole that size, they cut a patch big enough to cover the hole and hold the rivets, and just riveted it on there.
And that was it. Huh? So these airplanes had patches all over the place.
Yeah. They were all painted olive drab when I was there. I got home and I looked at the airplane and it had a whole bunch of new holes. And this airplane had a whole mess of patches on it already. Now they painted the patches olive drab when they finished. The crew chief walked by and I said, "Chief, I think it would look neat if you painted all the patches on this airplane yellow." You know, with an olive drab.
Sure.
He looked at me and he shook his head and said, "Come on, Lieutenant, the whole damn airplane would be yellow." Oh, boy. That airplane got 64 missions on it before it was shot down.
I was just going to ask. That's an incredible number.
Yeah, but let's see. Now, after I got that new crew, their airplane was gone. They ditched it. It's in the bottom of the North Sea. So we got another airplane, and it was a G model that only had 6 missions on it. Almost a brand new airplane. The G model had that chin turret under the nose.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's how you told the difference. We flew 6 missions on it. Then all of us got a pass to London for 3 days. Came back, and the airplane was named already when we got it, named Dolly. Dolly was gone. Somebody had flown it while we were gone, got shot down.
Oh, man.
So we got an old one then. But I did that. I flew 7 different B-17s on combat missions. All of them were destroyed after I flew them. 2 of them, I flew a mission and got out, and the next mission it was shot down. So I came that close.
That's crazy.
So don't lend Dick your car. That's the moral of the story.
No, you don't want to borrow Dick's car.
Yeah, maybe.
Oh man, I was so lucky. It was unbelievable.
So you had obviously lots of flak, lots of holes in the airplane.
Yeah.
Any other big problems? Fires, engine issues?
I lost 8 engines in 28 missions. The most at any time was my last mission, and I lost 2. I had 2 out, 2 running, one of them leaking oil all the way from the target, but I made it back to England.
Was that your closest call, that mission?
Yeah.
You want to tell us that story?
Yeah, it was a digger. The target that day was an aircraft factory at Augsburg, Germany, way down in southeast Germany. So the mission was total 7.5 hours down there and back. So we had a 21 ship formation. We got to now the route to and from the target was not just a straight line. We deviated to avoid major flak installations on the way to and from. So we got there and got on the bomb run, and flak was intense. They put anti-aircraft completely around these targets because they didn't know which way we were going to come in. But they knew we were going to try to bomb certain targets. Aircraft factory was primary target for us. And so we got there, and on the bomb run, we were in heavy flak. We all took some damage. We got to the target, and all airplanes were still there and dropped their bombs. And 3 of them went down right after that. 3 of our airplanes out of our formation went down. And so as we turned away from the target, 18 of us left in formation, and all of us damaged. Now my little bow turret gunner called in to me, "We got oil running off the wing behind number 1 engine." And I said, "Well, how fast is it running?" He said, "It's a steady stream, but it's not a gusher." On the way back, I got hit in number 2 and number 3. Number 1's leaking oil all the way from the target. I got massive hit in those 2. Lost them within minutes. One of them I got the prop feathered, the other one I didn't. It tore loose from the engine. No oil, the engine froze. And so everything was shut down on number 2 and number 3. And number 1 and 4 were running, but number 1's been leaking all the way from the target. Oh, I had everybody briefed what we were going to do. If I lost number 1, we had to get out of the airplane. I couldn't fly it on one outboard. So now if we were over water, I would not bail them out. I would ditch the airplane. And we had 2 big rafts on there. We got back to England finally. We were pretty slow, but got back there. And we had been by ourselves in enemy territory for a long time. Luckily, we didn't get picked on by fighters. They love to pick on a single cripple.
I bet.
Yeah. So I made it down on 2 engines. The crew chief took a look and said, maybe 15 minutes, you'd have lost that number 1.
And that was your...
I had no brakes once I got it on the runway. So I put it in the mud to stop it. Good old English mud.
And that was your 28th mission?
Yeah. I got the DFC right after that.
Holy smokes.
And then you had to go fly 2 more, though.
No, I didn't. I was in.
Oh, that was it?
Yeah, 28 was my...
Oh, that's right. You got prorated. That's right. You got 3.
Wow.
Jeez, that's the way to leave it.
I wrote a book. It's called My Wars, and it's just stories of things that happened to me during several wars. World War II was my first one. Vietnam was my last one.
Yeah, and I read the book recently. I mean, he flew everything from the B-17, the B-29, all the way through F-4s at the end, right? I mean,
yeah.
And how many airplanes total did you fly?
43 different types.
43 different types, all in the Air Force.
Yeah.
And did you fly anything after you retired?
Yeah, I did. A company, we retired in Santa Barbara. My neighbor was flying for a restaurant chain. And he came over one night and said, "Would you like to start flying again?" "What?" He said, "There's a company out here that has an executive airplane and their pilot just left. So here's the number of the CEO and his name." So I called him and he said, "Come out and talk to me." I told him I'd done a bit of flying, had about 5,000 hours, and said, okay, you got the job. Then he had to hire somebody from flight safety in Texas to come up and check me out in his airplane. It was a twin turboprop, Merlin.
Oh, Merlin. Merlin. Okay.
Yeah, nice airplane, but it wasn't fun flying. I flew for him for a little less than a year. I said, I quit. I couldn't roll the damn thing.
Yeah, I can imagine everything would be a little less exciting after.
A little different, yeah.
That career.
At F-4, I could spin that thing.
Yeah, I bet.
I got up to Mach 2.1 in the F-4
Great.
on a test flight.
Starting from B-17.
Start from there, go to there.
And I flew helicopters at 0 speed. So my range is 0 to Mach 2.1.
That's quite a range. Well, Dick, we know we got people out there. We're here on this Thursday at the museum, the 390th here in Tucson. It's on the grounds of the P. Marion Space Museum, but it is very much a separate museum.
Yeah.
So your proceeds to enter the museum do not go to the 390th. They rely on donations and
Yes.
And things. So he's here every Thursday about 10 o'clock. You can hear his stories in person sitting in front of a B-17. That's how I first met you. You want to show us what's in your shadow box?
Oh, yeah.
I remember you talking about that in the book.
There's a chunk of the fairway from Framingham Airport when they tore it up to make that's from the runway at Framingham, when they tore it up to put it back to a farm. And then this is a picture of me with my airplane at 21 years old, cocky as I could be. Just turned 21. So that's our tower. And it just shows a bunch of airplanes down there.
Right.
That's very cool.
And dropping bombs. So I flew 28 missions. Never got back without holes in the airplane.
You're a lucky guy, and you are 102 years old to boot. So
very impressive.
I have a younger girlfriend. she's 97. Just a kid.
Thank you so much, Dick. We encourage all of our listeners to come out, visit you at the 390th Museum, hear more of your stories, and check out your book.
I'm here every Thursday.
Right.
I've been working at the 390th Museum since 1992 on Thursday.
The statements made in this show are our own opinions and do not reflect, nor were they under any direction from any of our employers.